This bill be now read a second time, and I call the honourable member for Lyons.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. And look, I apologise to those in the gallery because some of them may be a little confused as to what the legislation before the House today actually entails. We heard the member for Wakefield pretty well talking about everything other there, and he did mention, though, towards the end of his contribution the word policy. Well, that's very much, Deputy Speaker, as I think we all know, a policy-free zone on the other side of the House at the moment. I mean, empathising with every Australian is fine if you offer a solution. If you offer a solution. But there are no solutions coming from those opposite. It is only complaint, no solution. We are in the business, tragically, it is our lot in life, to fix up the mess of 6 years that we inherited from those on the other side. They were the bad tenants that trashed the joint and have locked the door to stop us getting back in to fix it. That is the reality. The debt that we inherited, it wasn't a clean sheet of paper, Deputy Speaker. It was not a clean sheet of paper that we inherited on the 8th of September. We had deficits literally as far as the eye could see, that were booked up by the previous government. Some might even say booby traps, left by the previous government there for the incoming government to deal with. Every single day, this government is having to deal with the reality that our revenue is $110 million less than our expenditure. And it's simply unsustainable. So until those on the other side can offer a solution, they deserve not to be heard. To the bill at hand, and I'm pleased to rise and I'm pleased to support and I'm pleased to see the Minister for Communications in the chamber here before me, and just referencing some of the comments that he made in a keynote address recently. He mentioned semaphores, and so I thought I'd reflect. There is a semaphore that runs up the Tamar River, Deputy Speaker. You may not be aware, but many years ago it was used to signal to the town of Launceston when ships were coming through the heads at Low Head. There was a second semaphore at Mount Direction, about halfway down the River Tamar, on the eastern side of the Tamar River in my colleague, the member for Bass's electorate, and then on Windmill Hill, right next to theirs. Those that do know where the Aquatic Centre now is in Launceston, the Windmill Hill was formerly a semaphore thing. But I guess it goes to show, though, that within communications, indeed, it is an evolving and it is a changing place every day, whether it be from carrier pigeons to the marathon runners, to the mail services, to the telephonic services, satellite services increasingly, and of course the world that we live in today that is inhabited by the internet and the email and the different ways that we communicate. I represent a regional electorate, Deputy Speaker. I represent those communities essentially outside of the population centres in Tasmania. My electorate covers 50% of the island state, and the communities that make up my electorate reasonably, I think, demand and expect that their communication services are comparable, at least. And it's so pleasing to see that when the new government came to power and the Minister for Communications, in refocusing the disaster that was the NBN rollout, that in refocusing that there was an attention on those communities, not that had like, I don't know, South Sydney with respect, or Caulfield or so forth, that had actually quite reasonable ADSL services. But the emphasis and the attention was on those communities that had none or indeed very poor communications, and that has been welcomed. We have had a very successful rollout of wireless NBN throughout my electorate, and indeed the simplicity and the capacity of people to be able to, if they wish, sign up to that technology has indeed been encouraged and is indeed welcomed. Indeed, the mobile phone black spots. I think, I'm going to put my hand up and say that we are the mobile phone black spot capital of Australia, Deputy Speaker, and I think we nominated over 140 sites, and look, I understand that the $100 million that the current government has committed won't be able to solve every issue, but certainly there are communities there that are anxiously awaiting news in that regard. But television absolutely is still important, and it is a way that many regional households and communities still like to get their evening news. There were real challenges, and I note the member for Wakefield's comment, and I'm very pleased that in his electorate the transfer over from analogue technology to digital technology was a smooth one. That hasn't always been the case, certainly in parts of the electorate that I represent. The topography has presented challenges particularly, and I also again thank the Minister and his staff and the department for responding when we have communicated with his office in terms of the challenges that some communities are still having in respect of television communications. But the critical thing here to remember, Deputy Speaker, is that there has been broad consultation in regard to this bill. There were a number of recommendations that, after that consultation, out of the Senate committee report, there were two recommendations there that addressed some of the concerns that were raised, and it's very pleasing to see that consultation has taken place, and it's good to know that those on the other side are indeed supporting this bill. The purpose of the bill is to amend the Broadcasting Services Act of 1992 and the Radio Communications Act of 1992 and the Australian Communications and Media Authority Act of 2005 to implement industry-preferred changes in this portfolio. The bill intends to amend or remove provisions in the Act which were associated with a simulcast of analogue and digital television signals in the transition to digital broadcasting, and the restack of spectrum which was commenced after the last analogue signal was switched off. I won't go into detail in that space, but others have covered that. The bill will also rationalise requirements for operators in the industry, including removing their requirements for free-to-air broadcasters to report annually. And so it's a red tape. It's a red tape issue as much as anything else. Not reducing the standards, Deputy Speaker, but just making it easier for business in terms of reporting. Because what we want business in this space particularly is to be offering the best services that they can to as many Australians as they possibly can. And compliance and regulation indeed is important, but when that compliance and regulation becomes burdensome, indeed it is the responsibility of government to responsibly look at removing that where they can, and that's been a priority of this government since day one. Indeed, also to change parts of captioning target obligations for subscription television and the assessment of quality of captioning of live and pre-recorded broadcasts for free-to-air and subscription broadcasters. As I mentioned, red tape and green tape, the communications portfolio has done its bit and identified as a particular target for reform, as it is seen subject to substantial levels, indeed, of very complex and sometimes indeed necessary regulation, but where it's not necessary, we have acted. The proposed changes have been introduced as a result of consultation with industry and other stakeholders, including the hearing impaired. Indeed, those groups have expressed some concerns, and they've been addressed in the changes and the amendments to this bill. The bill responds to those as well as other concerns about subscription television licences and the radio and television broadcasting sector. Free-to-air television, lobby group Free TV, in its submission to the National Commission of Audit, claimed that free-to-air broadcasters were subject to a considerable number of reporting requirements, including those that were unnecessary or had substantial penalties for non-compliance. A number of government members have expressed also concern for a long time about the loss of local media voices, and the localism, diversity and competition in regional rural areas would be lost unless adjustments were made. Those adjustments have been made, and just to reflect, absolutely, I don't have any 1 centre. I have 3 metropolitan centres in which media providers are located, and indeed, their transmissions into regional areas of Tasmania are absolutely critical to the services and, as I mentioned before, the capacity of people to receive their evening news via television. And I look at my electorate. Absolutely, we would be concerned, particularly in an electorate such as a large regional rural electorate, were television and radio in the forms that they are currently presented were in any way compromised. I believe also that people should voice, in some respects, their discontent with the ABC's decisions, particularly in regard to regional rural Australia. Clearly, the recommendations that came out of the Lewis report that were highlighted the fact that there was no necessity at all. There was absolutely no necessity at all for services, particularly services in regional Australia, to be impacted by those modest cuts. There was the capacity there within management, within efficiencies that can be found in every business, to make those things. Whereas it appears, at least, that there has been decisions made that perhaps were the decisions actually that management had already reconciled to undertake, that have been detrimental to some services in regional Australia and regional Tasmania as well, and that's particularly disappointing. The legislation that rationalises the delivery of new digital television will also be welcomed by the people in my electorate of Lyons who have been particularly affected by the switch over from analogue to digital services. As I mentioned before, we've had major problems in Tasmania in certain areas that we're still addressing, and then they've had much to do with the topography of certain parts of the state. Indeed, in particularly hilly areas with mountains in between, often country communities, newly designated towers from which they are supposed to take their signals haven't provided that. Initially, it was the straight switch from analogue to digital, where people who had enjoyed full television reception for years, indeed in some cases, lost all services. I refer particularly to my constituent Derek Thompson from Multima in northwest Tasmania, who's been typical of a number of calls that we've had in that particular area over a number of months. Multima is a country area about 10 minutes' drive north of Deloraine, a major northern Tasmanian rural town. The Thompsons, like most of their neighbours, have always had good television reception on analogue, but one of those black spot areas in my electorate alliance for mobile phone coverage as well, so they can't access not only mobile phone coverage but also increasingly now television. With the switch over to digital television, Mr Thompson lost all television reception, so basically lost all contact with the world. Mr Thompson thought that he had prepared for the changeover to digital, previously investigating all the research and installing the necessary equipment to make the changes smooth, but he, and indeed some of his neighbours, had lost their services anyway. Mr Thompson, despite not having spare cash to invest in all the extras that digital television providers said he needed, persisted. He bought new aerials and other equipment and even climbed up on his roof a number of times to point the aerial in a different direction to face a tower on a distant mountain after it was discovered that a reception tower nearby had been switched off. We eventually got television reception back for Mr and Mrs Thompson, and then they and their neighbours lost it when again a new 4G mobile network was introduced in their area. We found out that the Thompsons and their neighbours needed to install a filter on the back of their television sets to filter out the interference that came from that new mobile phone network. So, look, it's indeed the first filter that he tried, fortunately, was the one that fixed the problem. But it just highlights the fact that particularly there are challenges in regional rural areas that sometimes those living in the big cities don't always appreciate. But again, I thank the Minister, I thank his staff, and I thank the Department for the cooperation and the work that they've done in assisting us in finding remedies to a couple of these issues. Thank you, Deputy Speaker.
I thank the honourable member for Lyons. The question is that this